I didn't lose friends. I took out the trash.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, and in that crystalline moment of silence, I realized my marriage was about to explode in front of 200 of the city's most influential people. Julia stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hand still extended from where she'd knocked my drink away, her emerald eyes blazing with the kind of fury that only comes from being challenged in public. "You will not embarrass me tonight, Luke," she hissed through her practiced smile, the one she reserved for cameras and charity galas. "Not at my birthday party." I looked down at the spreading puddle of Dom Perignon at my feet, then back up at my wife of 7 years. The woman I'd built a security consulting empire for. The woman whose family had treated me like hired help since day one, despite the fact that my company now employed over 300 people and had contracts with half the Fortune 500. Embarrass you? I kept my voice low, matching her fake smile with one of my own. "Julia, darling, I haven't even started yet." The color drained from her face, but before she could respond, her brother-in-law Victor Leland materialized beside us like a vulture sensing carrion. Vic had always been Julia's family's golden boy. Old money, Harvard MBA, the kind of guy who wore boat shoes without socks and called everyone sport, unironically. He was also, I'd recently discovered, sleeping with my wife. "Everything all right here, sport?" Vic's hand landed possessively on Julia's lower back, and I watched her lean into his touch, not even trying to hide it anymore. "Just having a conversation with my husband," Julia said, her voice dripping with disdain on the word husband. "Well, maybe save the domestic disputes for home, yeah?" Vic's tone was condescending, the way you'd speak to a child having a tantrum. "This is supposed to be a celebration." I studied his face, the weak chin hidden behind an expensive beard, the soft hands that had never done real work, the entitled smirk that came from never facing real consequences. In my previous life, before Julia, I'd been Army Special Forces. I'd dealt with actual threats, real enemies. Vic Leland was neither. He was just a parasite in a $1,000 suit. "You're absolutely right, Vic," I said, my smile widening. "This should be a celebration. In fact, I have a gift for the birthday girl." Julia's eyes narrowed. We'd been married long enough for her to recognize the dangerous calm in my voice. "Luke, don't—" "Oh, but I insist." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped box. After all, what's a birthday without surprises? The murmur of conversation around us had died down. I could feel eyes turning our way. Julia's society friends, her family, the politicians and business leaders who made up her social circle. The people who mattered to her more than anything else in the world. "Open it," I said, holding out the box. Julia's hands trembled slightly as she took it. She knew me well enough to be afraid, but her pride wouldn't let her back down in front of her audience. She tore off the wrapping paper with sharp, angry movements. Inside was a key. Just a simple brass key on a silver chain. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the key to our safe," I said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The one in my office. The one where I keep all our important documents." "Luke, stop!" There was panic creeping into her voice now. "See, I thought you should have access to everything," I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet terrace. "Especially since you've been so interested in my business affairs lately. You and Vic both." Vic's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything," I cut him off. "I'm stating facts. Like the fact that you've been feeding information about my company's security contracts to your hedge fund buddies. Or the fact that you've been sleeping with my wife for the past 8 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Julia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Vic looked like he was about to be sick. "You have no proof," Julia finally managed. I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Actually, I do. See, when you're in the security business, you learn a thing or two about surveillance. Amazing what people will say when they think they're alone in a hotel room." The crowd around us had grown larger. I could see Julia's mother pushing through the group, her face a mask of horror. This was her worst nightmare. A public scandal at one of her precious social events. "You bastard," Julia snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "You recorded us?" "I recorded my wife and her lover discussing how to steal my client list and sell it to competitors," I corrected. "The fact that you were undressed at the time is just unfortunate timing." Vic finally found his voice. "You can't use illegally obtained recordings in court." Ryan, a sound with no humor in it. "Who said anything about court?" I was thinking more along the lines of the business section of the Herald. Or maybe TMZ. They love a good scandal. You wouldn't dare, Julia breathed. Try me. For a moment, we stared at each other across a chasm of 7 years of marriage, 7 years of her family's condescension, 7 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough for their precious Julia. Then she did something I should have expected, but somehow didn't see coming. She slapped me. The crack of her palm against my cheek echoed across the terrace like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped collectively, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. The last thread holding our marriage together had just snapped. I touched my cheek, feeling the sting, then looked at my fingertips as if checking for damage. When I looked back up at Julia, my smile was gone. Well, I said quietly, I guess that makes things easier. Hazards reached into my other pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with legal documents. Divorce papers, filed this morning. You've been served. Julia's face went white. You can't. I can. I did. And before you start thinking about taking half of everything, you might want to remember that adultery is still grounds for fault divorce in this state, especially when it involves corporate espionage. I turned to address the crowd that had gathered around us, raising my voice so everyone could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been illuminating. I'm sure you'll understand that I won't be staying for cake. As I turned to leave, Vic grabbed my arm. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won? I looked down at his manicured hand on my sleeve, then back up at his face. In a voice so low only he could hear, I said, Vic, I spent 10 years in the Army learning how to neutralize threats. You're not a threat. You're not even a speed bump. You're just a mistake that's about to be corrected. He let go of my arm like it was on fire. I walked away from my wife, her lover, and 200 witnesses to the end of my marriage. Behind me, I could hear Julia starting to cry, not from sadness, but from rage and humiliation. The sound should have made me feel something, regret maybe, or pity. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The war was just beginning. 3 days later, I was sitting in my office at Travers Security Solutions, staring at the safe Julia's key was supposed to open. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had the key, but I'd already changed the lock. The new safe contained copies of everything the lawyers would need: financial records, business documents, and most importantly, the surveillance footage that would end her alimony dreams permanently. My assistant Rachel knocked on the door. Mr. Travers, there's a Tom Bradley here to see you. He says he's a friend. Tom Bradley. I hadn't heard that name in 6 months, not since he'd stopped returning my calls. Tom had been my best man, my business partner in the early days, and the godfather to the children Julia and I never had. He was also Julia's cousin, which had made things complicated when the marriage started falling apart. Send him in. Into my office, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He'd always been the diplomat in our group, the peacemaker who tried to smooth over conflicts before they escalated. Luke, he said, closing the door behind him, we need to talk. Do we? I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Because last I checked, you were too busy to take my calls. Come on, man. You know it's complicated with Julia being family and all. Was complicated, I corrected. Past tense. As of Monday morning, Julia and I are no longer married in anything but the legal sense. Which means you can stop walking on eggshells. Tom sat down across from my desk, running his hands through his hair. That's what I came to talk about. What you did at the party. Jesus, Luke. You humiliated her in front of everyone. Breastfeeding, she humiliated herself. I just provided the spotlight. You recorded them, man, in a hotel room. That's pretty messed up. I felt my jaw clench. You know what's messed up? Having your wife and her lover plan to steal your client list while they're screwing in a bed you're paying for. You know what's messed up? Finding out your best friend knew about it and didn't say a word. Tom's face went red. I didn't know this is no word. And then Tom's face went red. No and a bed. Ugh. Tom's face went red. My cart and put after that laced a text. Tom's face went red. My dedicated, getting most of them. Tom's face went red. I didn't know about the business stuff. I swear to God, Luke, I knew about Vic, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a midlife crisis thing. I never thought they'd try to hurt your company. But you knew she was cheating. I suspected. I never had proof. And you said nothing. She's my cousin. You're my best friend. I was hoping it would burn itself out. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. Traverse Security had offices in one of the renovated waterfront buildings, and from my corner office, I could see the marina where I kept my boat. It was one of the few places I could still find peace. How long? I asked without turning around. How long what? How you been choosing her over me? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was quiet. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? When was the last time we had dinner? Just us, like we used to. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something for your law firm. Luke, that's not fair. We're both busy. We have responsibilities. We had friendship. I turned around to face him. Had. Past tense. Tom's face crumpled. Don't do this, man. Don't let Julia destroy what we have. Julia didn't destroy it. You did. The moment you decided her feelings mattered more than our friendship, you destroyed it. That's not... He stopped, seeming to realize there was no good way to finish that sentence. What do you want from me, Luke? You want me to cut ties with my own family? I want you to leave my office. Luke, get out, Tom, and don't come back unless you're here on official business. He stood slowly, like an old man with arthritis. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't mean much now, but I am sorry. After he left, I sat alone in my office for next changer. For the first temp benches, luck to go through the after freedom. After he left, I sat alone in my office. Moving the boats in the harbor, Tom had been the first domino to fall, but he wouldn't be the last. Julia's betrayal had infected everything, turned friends into enemies and allies into strangers. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but I recognized the writing style immediately. This isn't over. You think you're so clever, but you have no idea what you've started. Jay. I deleted the message and made a mental note to have my IT team trace the number. Julia was scared, which meant she was dangerous. Scared people made mistakes, but they also did desperate things. I pulled up my contact list and started making calls. If Julia wanted a war, she'd get one. But she was about to learn the difference between playing games with society friends and going up against someone who'd made a career out of winning battles. The first call was to Marcus Webb, my head of operations and former Navy SEAL. If things were going to get ugly, I wanted professionals watching my back. The second call was to my lawyer, Jennifer Chen, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for leaving opposing counsel in smoking ruins. The third call was to a private investigator named Danny Sullivan, who owed me a favor from a case 3 years ago. By the time I finished making arrangements, the sun was setting over the harbor. I locked the real safe, pocketed the key Julia would never get to use, and headed home to my empty house. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The ambush came on Thursday morning, disguised as a coffee meeting with old friends. I should have seen it coming, but I was distracted by the forensic accountant's report that had arrived that morning, detailing exactly how much money Julia and Vic had cost my company with their information leaks. The coffee shop was one of those trendy places downtown where the baristas had art degrees, and the espresso cost more than most people made in an hour. I had agreed to meet Sarah Peterson and Mike Chen, no relation to my lawyer, thinking they wanted to catch up. Sarah had been Julia's college roommate and maid of honor at our wedding. Mike was a local news anchor who'd been part of our social circle for years. I should have realized something was wrong when they were already seated at a corner table when I arrived, their faces serious and their voices low. Sarah looked up as I approached, her smile brittle and fake. Luke, thanks for meeting us. I sat down, noting how they'd positioned themselves across from me like an interrogation panel. What's this about? Mike leaned forward, his news anchor voice carefully modulated. We're concerned about you, man. What happened at Julia's party, that wasn't like you. Wasn't it? I signaled the barista for coffee. How would you know what I'm like? When was the last time any of us actually talked about anything real? Shutting Sarah's perfectly contoured face creased with what might have been genuine concern. We used to be close, Luke, all of us, before things got so complicated. Complicated. I tasted the word like it was sour. Is that what we're calling adultery and corporate espionage now? See, that's what we mean, Mike said. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But the way you handled it, publicly humiliating Julia, recording private conversations? That's not healthy, man. The barista brought my coffee and I took a sip before responding. What would have been healthy, Mike? Suffering in silence while my wife and her lover destroyed my business? Pretending everything was fine while they laughed at me behind my back? You could have handled it privately, Sarah said. Talk to Julia, work things out like adults. I stared at her for a long moment. You knew. What? You knew about Vic, about the affair. I can see it in your face. Sarah's cheeks flushed red. There were rumors, but you said nothing, just like Tom. I leaned back in my chair, studying both of their faces. How many of you knew? How many of our so-called friends knew my wife was cheating and decided it wasn't worth mentioning? It wasn't our place, Mike said defensively. Marriage is complicated. We didn't want to get involved in something that might have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Right. Well, here's something that won't be a misunderstanding. I'm done. What? Sarah asked. Done with all of this. The pretense, the social obligations, the fake friendships. You want to know what's not healthy? Spending 7 years surrounded by people who smile to your face while they stab you in the back. Mike's anchor mask slipped, showing genuine anger underneath. That's not fair, Luke. We've been your friends for years. We've supported you, celebrated your successes. Have you? Or have you tolerated me because I was married to Julia? Because I was useful for business connections and charity events? The silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah tried one more time. Luke, please, don't let this destroy everything. Julia made mistakes, but that doesn't mean you have to burn down your entire life. I'm not burning down my life, I said, standing up. I'm finally starting to live it. I left money on the table for my coffee and walked out, leaving them sitting there with their concerned expressions and their hollow words. Outside, the morning air felt cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My phone rang as I reached my car. Jennifer Chen, my lawyer. Luke, we have a problem. Julia's hired Harrison and Associates. I knew the name. Harrison and Associates was the most expensive divorce firm in the city, specializing in destroying wealthy husbands and leaving them with nothing but child support payments and bitter memories. Let me guess, I said. They're claiming I was harmful, controlling, and they want an emergency restraining order. How did you... Never mind. Yes, that's exactly what they're claiming. They're also saying you threatened Vic at the party and that you've been stalking Julia. I got in my car and started the engine. Can they make it stick? Not if we're prepared. But Luke, this is going to get ugly. They're going to drag your military service into it, claim you have PTSD, maybe even suggest you're dangerous. Let them try. I have something they don't. What's that? The truth. And about 6 hours of high-definition video that proves Julia's the one who's been lying. There was a pause. Please tell me you obtained that video legally. Private investigator, hired after I suspected the affair. Everything was done by the book, Jen. I may be angry, but I'm not stupid. Good, because if this goes to trial, they're going to come at you with everything they have. Are you ready for that? I thought about Tom's betrayal, about Sarah and Mike's ambush, about 7 years of being treated like an outsider in my own marriage. I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a moment, watching people walk by on the sidewalk. Normal people with normal problems, going about their normal lives. I envied them their simplicity. My phone buzzed with another text from Julia. You're going to regret this. I'm going to take everything you have. This time, I didn't delete the message. Instead, I forwarded it to Jennifer with a note. Exhibit A. Threatening communications from plaintiff. Ronde. The documentation game, but only one of us was a professional at it. The confrontation I'd been dreading came on Friday night at Murphy's Pub, the Irish bar where our old crew used to meet every weekend. I'd stopped going months ago, but Danny Sullivan, my private investigator, had called to say he had information that couldn't wait until Monday. Murphy's was crowded, filled with the usual mix of young professionals and old-timers nursing their weekend wounds. Danny was waiting in our old corner booth, a thick manila folder on the table in front of him. He was a compact man in his 50s, with the kind of face that forgot itself the moment you looked away, a useful trait in his line of work. "You're not going to like this," he said without preamble as I sat down. "I haven't liked much of anything lately. What did you find?" He opened the folder and spread out a series of photographs. Julia and Vic have been busy since the party. They've hired a crisis management firm, and they're building a narrative. The photos showed Julia at various locations around the city. Her lawyer's office, a medical clinic, what looked like a therapist's office. In every shot, she looked fragile, vulnerable, like a woman who'd been through trauma. "She's claiming misuse?" I asked. "Psychological misuse. Says you were controlling, manipulative, that you isolated her from her friends and family. The medical visit was for anxiety medication. The therapist is going to testify about the emotional damage you've caused." I studied the photos, noting the careful staging, the way Julia's posture and expression had been crafted to evoke sympathy. "What about Vic?" "He's playing the concerned friend who tried to help her escape a toxic marriage. Says the affair was emotional support that turned physical when she was at her most vulnerable." Son of a witch. I leaned back in the booth, processing the implications. They're turning her infidelity into his heroism. "It gets worse." Danny pulled out another set of photos. "They've been talking to your old friends. Sarah Peterson gave a statement saying you seemed increasingly unstable in recent months. Mike Chen is going on record about your erratic behavior at the party." Plunge. I could respond I heard familiar laughter from across the bar. I looked up to see Tom Bradley walking in with Sarah, Mike, and 3 other people from our old social circle. They hadn't seen me yet, but it was only a matter of time. "This can't be a coincidence," I muttered. Danny followed my gaze. "You want to leave?" "No. I made a decision that I'd probably regret. I want to hear what they really think of me." Conflicts. Tom spotted me first. His face went pale, but after a moment's hesitation, he said something to the others, and they all headed toward our booth. Sarah looked nervous. Mike looked determined, and the others, Janet and Robert Morrison and Chris Taylor, looked like they were preparing for an intervention. "Luke," Tom said as they reached our table, "we didn't expect to see you here." "It's a public place, Tom. I have as much right to be here as anyone." Danny started to gather up his photos, but I put a hand on his arm. "Leave them. I think our friends should see what they're really supporting." Sarah glanced at the photos and her face went white. "Luke, what is this?" "Everything. Something you all seem to have forgotten the value of." I gestured to the empty chairs around our booth. "Please, sit. Let's have that conversation we should have had months ago." But sat down, crowding around the table like a jury. Chris Taylor, who ran a successful marketing firm, spoke first. "Luke, we're worried about you. The way you've been acting lately." "I've been acting since I discovered my wife was cheating on me and stealing from my company?" "That's not what happened," Janet Morrison said firmly. "She was a family therapist, which apparently made her an expert on everyone's relationships." "Julia told us what really happened. How you became controlling and paranoid. How you started monitoring her communications." Because she was leaking confidential business information to her lover." I picked up one of Danny's photos and slid it across the table. "This is Julia meeting with Harrison and Associates, the law firm that specializes in destroying men in divorce court. This was taken 2 days before I filed for divorce." Robert Morrison, Janet's husband and a successful businessman himself, studied the photo. "So, she was preparing to protect herself." Chocolate. "From what? I never laid a hand on her. I never threatened her. I never controlled her money, her friends, or her activities. The only thing I controlled was access to my business's confidential information, which any reasonable person would do when they discovered corporate espionage." "Corporate espionage?" Mike's news anchor instincts kicked in. "That's a pretty serious accusation." I pulled out my phone and opened the audio app. "Would you like to hear her discussing which of my clients would be most interested in switching security firms? Or maybe the part where she and Vic laugh about how stupid I am for trusting her?" The table went silent. Sarah's face was ashen. "You recorded them?" "A private investigator recorded them, legally, in a public restaurant where they thought they were safe to discuss their plans." I looked around the table at these people I'd once considered friends. "The question is, why are you all so eager to believe her version without asking for mine?" Wilmington Tom shifted uncomfortably. "We're not taking sides." Buzz. The word came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about civility. "You've all already taken sides. You've decided I'm the villain in this story because it's easier than admitting you were wrong about Julia. That's not fair, Chris said. We've known Julia for years. She's not capable of what you're describing. I pulled out another photo. This one showing Julia and Vic entering a hotel together 6 months ago. Or this. Another photo. From a different day, different hotel. Or this. I spread out a dozen photos, creating a timeline of betrayal that was impossible to deny. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. The silence stretched on until Janet finally spoke. Even if she made mistakes. Mistakes? I laughed, a bitter sound that made several people at nearby tables look over. Janet, if one of your clients discovered their spouse was systematically betraying them personally and professionally, what would you advise them to do? I'd advise them to seek counseling, to try to work through, advise them to enable their tormentor. Because that's what Julia is, a tormentor. She systematically lied to me, stole from me, humiliated me. And now she's trying to destroy me in court. But because she's a woman and I'm a man, because she cries pretty and I don't, you all assume I must be the problem. Robert leaned forward. Luke, we understand you're hurt. No, you don't. I stood up, gathering Danny's photos. You understand that your comfortable worldview has been challenged, and instead of dealing with that, you've decided to shoot the messenger. You've decided that maintaining your friendship with Julia is more important than the truth. It's not that simple, Sarah said quietly. It is exactly that simple. You have a choice. Support someone who's been honest with you, or support someone who's been lying to everyone. You've made your choice. I pulled out my wallet and dropped money on the table for my beer. Danny, let's go. I think we've learned everything we need to know. As we walked, hauled after me. Luke, wait. This doesn't have to end like this. I turned back to look at him. At all that changes lift those bitter ideas and limit the gene. Luke, left to do. Yes, it does. Because I'm done pretending that people who betray me are my friends. I'm done making excuses for people who choose sides based on convenience instead of truth. And I'm done caring what any of you think. Danny lit a cigarette and studied my face. That was either very stupid or very smart. Which do you think? Smart. Now it's your first to do this. If you're the new Facebooks of the gene, what of our business is that getting someone? Smart. Now they can't claim they didn't know the truth. When this goes to trial, their testimony won't hold up because we can prove they saw the evidence and chose to ignore it. Fall back through the window of Murphy's, watching my former friends huddled together around the table, probably discussing how unstable I'd seemed, how right Julia was about my behavior. You know what the funny thing is? I said. I would have forgiven her. If she'd come to me, admitted the affair, agreed to counseling, I would have tried to save the marriage. But she couldn't even give me that much respect. Exactly. What do you want to do now? Fleeing, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a name I hadn't called in years. Marcus Webb, my old army buddy, who now ran a private security firm in Chicago. If Julia wanted to play dirty, it was time to level the playing field. Now we stop playing defense, I said, hitting the call button. It's time to remind everyone why you don't go to war against someone who's actually been to war. Marcus Webb arrived on Sunday morning, looking like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster despite being 45 years old. 6'2", built like a linebacker, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from 20 years of handling impossible situations. He'd driven down from Chicago overnight after my call, bringing with him a team of 3 specialists, and a plan that would have made our old commanding officer proud. We met at my house, a modern colonial in one of the city's better neighborhoods that Julia had insisted on buying, despite my preference for something smaller and more practical. Now I was grateful for the space, and for the security system I'd installed that was several generations ahead of anything most people had. So, Marcus said, settling into my living room with a cup of coffee, your wife decided to play hardball. Ex-wife, technically. And yes, she's hired a crisis management firm, turned half my friends against me, and is building a case that I'm an unstable, harmful husband who needs to be stripped of everything I own. Evidence? I handed him the files Danny had compiled. Marcus read through everything with the methodical attention to detail that had made him one of the best sergeants in our unit. After 20 minutes, he looked up with a grim smile. She's good. Professional level manipulation, coordinated character assassination, Multiple vectors of attack. If I didn't know you, I might believe her story myself. But you do know me. Chemotherapy. I know you're one of the most ethical people I've ever met, sometimes to a fault. I also know you're dangerous when cornered, which is what makes this interesting. Heather, he pulled out his tablet and showed me a detailed timeline. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to document everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence they think they can use against you. Then, we're going to systematically dismantle their case. How? By doing what we do best. Superior intelligence, better planning, and overwhelming force applied at the right moment. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out a strategy that was both brilliant and completely legal. His team would conduct surveillance on Julia and Vic, documenting their activities and looking for inconsistencies in their story. They would investigate the crisis management firm, looking for any ethical violations or conflicts of interest. Most importantly, they would build a comprehensive profile of everyone involved in Julia's campaign against me. The key, Marcus explained, is that they're fighting this like a civilian conflict, all emotion and public relations. But you're not a civilian, and neither am I. We're going to fight this like a military operation. What about my friends, the ones who've turned against me? Marcus's expression hardened. They're not your friends, Luke. They're collaborators, and we're going to treat them accordingly. That afternoon, Marcus's team went to work. Sarah Peterson got a visit from someone claiming to be a journalist investigating domestic misuse cases, who asked pointed questions about her relationship with Julia and whether she'd ever actually witnessed any harmful behavior. Mike Chen found himself being audited by the FCC after an anonymous tip about conflicts of interest in his reporting. Tom Bradley's law firm received a complaint from the state bar about his failure to report potential criminal activity. None of it was illegal. All of it was documented, and all of it sent a clear message. If you wanted to play games with someone's life, you'd better be prepared for the consequences. The real breakthrough came on Tuesday, when Marcus called me at my office with news that changed everything. We found something, he said. Julia's crisis management firm has been feeding information to a blogger who specializes in high-profile divorces. They're planning to publish a hit piece on you tomorrow, complete with quotes from your friends about your unstable behavior. Can we stop it? Better that. We can turn it around. Because the blogger didn't do his homework, and neither did the crisis management firm. What do you mean? They love the mince for me. Julia struck on this blogger. They have hold this ministrated. They just needed to plan something so. But they should be. Look at that Breck that ministrated, by the way. What do you mean? They didn't turned it, because the blogger didn't do his homework, and neither did the crisis management firm about your unstable behavior. What do you mean? They're claiming you have PTSD from your military crisis. They're claiming you have no distancy from the film. They're claiming you have PTSD from your military service, that you're prone to violent outbursts, that you've been in therapy for anger management. Problem is, all of that is verifiably false. Your military records are clean. Your medical records show no history of mental health issues, and you've never been in therapy. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. They overplayed their hand. They did. And now we have them for libel, defamation, and probably a few other things Jennifer can think of. But more importantly, we have proof that Julia's been lying about everything. What do you need from me? Nothing. Just be ready for the counterattack. Because once we spring this trap, they're going to come at you with everything they have left. Burl Post went live Wednesday morning, exactly as Marcus had predicted. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, painting me as a dangerous, unstable veteran who had terrorized his wife and threatened her lover. The comments section filled up with outrage and sympathy for Julia, who was quoted extensively about her fear and trauma. By noon, the story had been picked up by 3 local news outlets and was trending on social media. My office phone rang constantly with reporters wanting comments. Several clients called to express concern about their security contracts. I spent the day in meetings with Jennifer and Marcus, preparing for what we all knew was coming. Julia's lawyers would use the blog post as evidence of public concern about my mental state. They would argue that the court needed to act quickly to protect Julia from her dangerous ex-husband. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Julia's team had pulled strings to get it fast-tracked, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. They had no idea we'd been preparing for this moment since Sunday. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy Julia's credibility permanently. Marcus sat in the gallery behind me, along with Danny and two of my employees who could testify about my character if needed. Julia sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, Harrison himself, looking fragile and frightened. She dressed carefully for the performance, conservative suit, minimal makeup, the perfect picture of a woman who'd been through trauma. When she saw me, she actually flinched, as if she were afraid I might attack her right there in the courtroom. It was a masterful performance. It was also about to backfire spectacularly. Judge Patricia Walsh called the hearing to order and listened as Harrison painted me as a dangerous man who had threatened his client and her friend, who had a history of instability, and who needed to be restrained before someone got hurt. Then it was Jennifer's turn. "Your Honor," she said, standing with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush, "the plaintiff has made serious allegations about my client's mental state and military service. I'd like to present evidence that these allegations are not only false, but deliberately fabricated." She handed the judge a thick folder. "These are my client's complete military records, obtained directly from the Department of Defense. They show no history of disciplinary action, no psychological issues, and no indication of the PTSD that plaintiff claims he suffers from." But Jennifer continued. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that the plaintiff and her representatives have engaged in a deliberate campaign of defamation against my client." She played the audio recording of Julia and Vic discussing their plans, then showed the photographs of their affair, then presented evidence of the corporate espionage. With each piece of evidence, Julia's face grew paler and Harrison's objections grew more desperate. The final blow came when Jennifer presented a sworn affidavit from the blogger who had published the hit piece, admitting that he had been paid by Julia's crisis management firm to publish false information about me without verifying any of the claims. Judge Walsh looked at Julia with the expression of someone who had just realized they'd been lied to in their own courtroom. "Ms. Travers, are you telling me that you filed for an emergency restraining order based on fabricated evidence?" Throttle's lawyer tried to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. Not only did the judge deny the restraining order, she also ordered Julia to pay my legal fees and referred the matter to the district attorney for potential perjury charges. As we left the courthouse, Julia tried one last desperate gambit. She approached me on the steps, tears streaming down her face, and said loudly enough for the reporters to hear, "Luke, please, I know I made mistakes, but this has gone too far. Can't we work this out?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 7 years, who had systematically destroyed everything good between us and then tried to destroy me when I fought back. "Julia," I said quietly, "you had 7 years to work things out. You chose Vic instead. Now you get to live with that choice." I walked away, leaving her on the courthouse steps with her tears and her lies and her ruined reputation. Behind me, I could hear reporters asking pointed questions about the evidence that had been presented, about the fabricated blog post, about the affair that had started this whole mess. The war was over, but the victory was just beginning. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week later, at the Harbor Club's annual charity gala, the same event where Julia and I had met 8 years earlier. I hadn't planned to attend, but Marcus convinced me it was necessary. "You need to be seen," he'd argued. "You need to show everyone that you're not hiding, not ashamed, not the broken man Julia's been claiming you are." So I went, wearing my best tuxedo and carrying myself with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. The Harbor Club was one of the city's most exclusive venues, a restored 19th century mansion overlooking the water, where the wealthy gathered to see and be seen while writing tax-deductible checks to worthy causes. The moment I walked in, conversations stopped. I could feel eyes following me across the room, could hear the whispers that followed in my wake. The story of our divorce had become the scandal of the season, especially after the courthouse revelations had made the evening news. I made my way to the bar, ordered a scotch, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Tom appeared first, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. "Luke, I didn't expect to see you here." "It's for a good cause," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "The Children's Hospital, right? I've been a donor for years." "About what happened at Murphy's. What about it?" "I mean, after everything came out in court, we realized we might have been wrong about some things." I studied his face, seeing the guilt and uncertainty there. Some things? Okay, a lot of things. Maybe everything. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from college. Julia called me yesterday. She's not doing well. That's unfortunate. That she says she's sorry this far. I'm sure she is sorry. Sorry she got caught. Sorry her plan didn't work. Sorry she's facing perjury charges and a countersuit for defamation. Come on, man. She made mistakes, but she's family. She's broken. She broke herself, Tom. I didn't do that to her. She did it to herself when she chose to lie and cheat and steal instead of being honest about what she wanted. Before Tom could respond, I saw Sarah and Mike approaching, both looking like they were walking to their own execution. The conversation I'd been avoiding for weeks was finally going to happen. Luke, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, can we talk? We're talking now. I mean, really talk. About what happened. About the things we said. About how you all decided I was a harmful husband without bothering to ask for evidence. About how you gave statements to Julia's lawyers calling me unstable and dangerous. Mike's face was red with embarrassment. We thought we were helping a friend in trouble. Breached. You were helping a friend in trouble. The wrong friend. We know that now, Sarah said. We saw the court documents. We know about the recordings, about Vic, about everything. We're sorry, Luke. We're really, truly sorry. I looked at the three of them, these people who had been such an important part of my life for so many years. A month ago, their apology would have meant everything to me. Now it felt hollow, too little and too late. You're sorry because you got caught supporting a lie, I said. You're not sorry for betraying me. You're sorry that it turned out to be the wrong side to bet on. That's not fair, Tom protested. Fair? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Tom, you knew Julia was cheating on me and said nothing. Sarah, you gave a statement to her lawyers calling me psychologically harmful without ever asking if it was true. Mike, you went on record questioning my mental stability based on one public confrontation where I exposed the truth about my wife's affair. And now you want to apologize because it turned out I was telling the truth all along? The three of them exchanged glances, and I could see they were realizing that their comfortable assumption that I would forgive them, that we could go back to being friends, was not going to happen. What do you want from us? Sarah asked. Nothing. I want nothing from any of you. I want you to leave me alone and go back to your lives and your comfortable assumptions about right and wrong. Luke, Tom started. No, I cut him off. You made your choice. You chose Julia over me. Lies over truth. Comfort over courage. That choice has consequences. Live with them. I turned to walk away, but Mike grabbed my arm. You can't just write us all off. We've been friends for years. I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, then back up at his face. Have we? Because friends trust each other. Friends give each other the benefit of the doubt. Friends ask questions before they make judgments. What we had was a social arrangement based on convenience and shared activities. The moment it was tested, it fell apart. I pulled my arm free and walked away, leaving them standing by the bar with their guilt and their useless apologies. The evening's real surprise came an hour later, when I was standing on the club's terrace overlooking the harbor. I'd needed air, needed space away from the whispers and stares and uncomfortable conversations. The charity auction was in full swing inside, but out here it was quiet, except for the sound of water against the dock. Luke. I turned to find Julia standing behind me, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. She'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. Her dress, which would have been stunning on her a month ago, now hung loose on her frame. Her face was gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Julia, I'm surprised to see you here. I had to come. I had to see you. Why? She moved to stand beside me at the railing, but kept several feet of distance between us. To apologize. To try to make you understand. Understand what? Why I did what I did. Why I destroyed everything. I waited, saying nothing. I was scared, she said finally. Scared that you were going to leave me. Scared that I wasn't good enough for you. Scared that your success was going to make you realize you could do better. So, you had an affair. I know how it sounds, but Vic made me feel important, special, like I mattered. You mattered to me. Or was I just another acquisition, another symbol of your success? I considered the question seriously, looking back over our marriage with the clarity that only comes from distance. At first, you mattered to me, really mattered. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my wife and started being my wife's role in the life we'd built. I don't know when that happened, or if it was my fault or yours, or just the way these things go. I felt it too, the distance, the way we stopped really seeing each other. So, why didn't you talk to me about it? My thought that first understand the choice that they had another. So why didn't you stop leaving to me? Look, if your favorite something choice, that all is yourselves of the choice. So why didn't you feel, then start try to completely meeting this? So why didn't you talk to me? My fault, that choice that were still really mattered. So why didn't you talk to me about my fault that were still really mattered? So why didn't you talk to me about it? Why didn't you ask for counseling, or suggest we take time apart, or do any of the things that adults do when their marriage is in trouble? Julia was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water. Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to find someone else than to do the work of fixing what we had. And the business stuff, stealing my client information, that was Vic's idea. He said you owed me for all the years I'd supported your career, that I deserved half of everything you'd built. He made it sound like justice. It was theft, Julia. Corporate espionage. You could have gone to prison. I know that now. I know a lot of things now that I was too stupid or too selfish to see before. We stood in silence for several minutes, two people who had once loved each other trying to find some meaning in the wreckage of their marriage. I'm going away, Julia said finally. My lawyer thinks it's best if I leave town until the criminal investigation is over. My sister has a place in Colorado where I can stay. That's probably smart. I want you to know that I'm dropping the divorce contest. You can have everything, the house, the investments, all of it. I just want it to be over. I looked at her profile in the moonlight, seeing traces of the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. What about Vic? Vic's gone. Left town the day after the court hearing. Turns out he was using me just like he used everyone else. His company's under investigation for insider trading, and apparently I wasn't the only wife he was getting information from. I'm sorry. You? I thought about it. Yeah, I am. Not sorry that he's gone, but sorry that you got hurt. Despite everything, I never wanted you to be hurt. I know. That's what makes this so much worse. You're a good man, Luke.
You deserve better than what I gave you.
She turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for all of it. Sorry for the lies, sorry for the betrayal, sorry for trying to destroy you when you fought back. You didn't deserve any of it. No, I agreed, I didn't. She walked away then, back into the club and out of my life. I stayed on the terrace for another hour, thinking about marriage and betrayal and the price of trust. When I finally went back inside, the auction was over and people were beginning to leave. Marcus found me by the coat check. How did it go? It went. It's over. All of it? All of it. We walked out together in tension of the state. We walked back together later in states and working about this. Reynolds, we walked out together into the cool night air. In the parking lot, I could see Tom and Sarah and Mike standing by their cars, still talking in low, urgent voices. They looked up as I passed, but none of them tried to approach me again. Any regrets? Marcus asked as we reached my car.
I thought about the question seriously.
7 years of marriage, gone. A dozen friendships, ended. A life I'd built, dismantled piece by piece. No, I said finally. No regrets. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to see what's really worth saving. And what's worth saving? I looked back at the Harbor Club, at the life I was leaving behind, at the people who had chosen comfort over truth and convenience over loyalty. My self-respect, I said. My integrity. My ability to sleep at night knowing I didn't compromise who I am to make other people comfortable with their lies. I got in my car and drove home to my empty house, to my quiet life, to the peace that comes from knowing that the people around you are there because they choose to be, not because they have to be. It was the best trade I'd ever made. 3 months later, I sold the house and moved to a smaller place closer to the water. Traverse Security Solutions was thriving, with new contracts coming in every week from clients who respected someone who fought back when attacked. Julia had moved to Colorado permanently, and the criminal charges against her were dropped in exchange for her cooperation in the investigation of Vic's insider trading scheme. I never saw Tom, Sarah, or Mike again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd formed their own tight little group, bonded by their shared guilt and their mutual agreement that I'd been unreasonable in my refusal to forgive them. Danny Sullivan became a regular contractor for my company, and Marcus opened a branch office in the city. We had dinner every Friday night, along with a growing circle of people who understood that loyalty wasn't conditional, and that trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with apologies. On a warm evening in late spring, I was sitting on my deck overlooking the harbor when my phone rang.
Unknown number, but I recognize the area code as Colorado. Hello, Luke. Julia's voice was different, quieter, more thoughtful than I remembered.
Julia, how are you? Better, different. I'm in therapy, real therapy this time, not the performance I put on during the divorce. I'm learning things about myself that I don't like very much. That's good. Growth is usually uncomfortable. I wanted to call because I heard about your company, like those more than Brigger company before your company. I wanted to call their good point, but I know in Luke. The expansion, the new contracts. I'm proud of you. Thank you. I also wanted you to know that I'm getting married again. To someone I met in group therapy. He's nothing like Vic. Nothing like you either. He's just a good man who's working on his own problems, like I'm working on mine. I'm happy for you, Julia, really. Are you? Happy, I mean? I looked out at the water, at the boats coming into harbor as the sun set behind them. I thought about my work, my friends, my quiet evenings and peaceful mornings.
I thought about the absence of drama, of lies, of people who smiled while they planned your destruction.
Yeah, I said. I am.
Good. You deserve to be happy.
I sat on my deck until the stars came out, thinking about forgiveness and redemption and the strange paths that lead us away from the people we used to be. I never called her back, and she never called me again. Some stories end with reconciliation and renewed friendship. This wasn't one of those stories. This was the story of a man who learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let other people's choices define your life. Sometimes the greatest victory is walking away from people who don't deserve your time, your energy, or your forgiveness. Sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing games with people who cheat.